To survive a fall into the abyss, a night out in the open in the death zone, only to fade away, inside a tent, the summer of 1986. K2 Camp 4. This place became an icy trap for Julie Tullis, a woman whose will was harder than rock. 5 days of a relentless storm, 7 people trapped at 8,000 meters, and a single fatal mistake that started a countdown. Why did the savage mountain grant her a miracle, only to then cruelly snatch her life away? To understand how it all ended, we have to go back to the very beginning. What if resilience isn't a choice, but the very air you've breathed since the day you were born? Imagine a world where silence isn't peace, but the quiet between air raid sirens, where the darkness outside isn't a sign of night, but a strict blackout order. This is the world Julie was born into in 1939. Europe is on the brink of its greatest upheaval, and her first cry is drowned out by the roar of history. Her early years are defined by limitations. Concepts like plenty or abundance exist only in books, read in whispers by the light of a dim lamp. Everyday reality is woven from scarcity. Ration cards aren't a temporary measure. They are the bedrock of the family's economy. Every slice of bread, every spoonful of sugar is immensely precious. This forges an entirely different relationship with things, with food, with comfort itself. The cold in a room isn't something you complain about. It's just a fact of life you deal with by putting on another sweater. Hunger is just that familiar rumble in your stomach you learn to ignore. An entire generation comes of age in this atmosphere. They don't know any other life, so they don't see their own as something terrible. Constant discomfort becomes the norm, a part of their very being. Complaining is pointless. I mean, who would you complain to? Your neighbors, whose shelves are just as empty? The authorities who imposed the restrictions in the first place? This shared experience forges people with an incredible capacity for endurance. Their bodies, and more importantly, their minds, learn to operate in a constant state of conservation, conserving physical and emotional resources. They learn to find joy in the little things, to appreciate what they have, and to never give up, because the option to surrender simply doesn't exist in their worldview. This experience, gained at the very start of her life, becomes Julie's invisible psychological bedrock. It's stronger than any mountaineering gear and more reliable than the most advanced technology. Years later, when she finds herself on a mountain at the very edge of human limits, her body and mind simply activate an old survival program. What feels like unbearable deprivation to her teammates is, for her, just a faint echo of her past. They would look at her calm in the face of cold and exhaustion and see an almost supernatural willpower. But there was no secret. It's just that for her, this test of survival didn't begin at the foot of the mountain. It began way back in 1939. That hardened character, forged in an era of scarcity, was looking for an outlet, a place to be tested, and it found one. Not on the horizons of a shattered Europe, but in the vertical world. At 15, Julie's hands touched the warm, rough sandstone of the southern English cliffs for the very first time. After the gray asphalt and the endless queues, she discovers a world that only goes up. Out here, there are no rules, no limits. There's only you, the rock, and the simple, undeniable law of gravity. Every move is a small victory. Every foot you climb is a little more space you've reclaimed from fear. In 1956, at a place called Harrison's Rocks, her world changes forever. It's here, among people just as passionate as she is, that she meets Terry Tullis. It's not just two people meeting, it's more like two equally charged particles colliding. Their eyes meet, not across a crowded room, but up on a hold, 10 meters above the ground. They speak the same language, the language of movement, balance, and trust. Their connection quickly becomes something more than just a romance. It's a partnership, forged in a shared passion. Together, they decide to build a place where that passion could live and grow. And so, at the foot of the cliffs, their own little universe is born, a cafe and a climbing gear shop. The place quickly earns a nickname, Terry's Festerhound, and becomes a magnet for climbers from all over. This isn't just a business, it's a headquarters, a clubhouse, a confessional, and a home for dozens of people. The air is thick with the smell of chalk, strong tea, and stories of triumphs and failures. While so many climbers are obsessed with conquering summits, chasing personal bests, and seeking glory, Julie and Terry choose a different path. Their focus shifts away from their own egos and onto other people. They see climbing not just as a sport, but as a tool for personal growth. Julie starts working with the people who need that tool the most. She runs sessions for people with disabilities, for troubled teenagers, for anyone who's lost faith in themselves. She isn't just teaching them climbing technique, she's teaching them to trust their rope, their partner, and most importantly, to trust themselves. Watching someone who struggles to walk on flat ground find grace and freedom on a vertical rock face, Julie discovers a new depth of empathy within herself. She realizes the true summit isn't a mountain peak. It's the moment you help someone else cross their own internal chasm. This empathy, this ability to see the struggle in others, forces her to look deeper within. What if your greatest adversary isn't a glacier or a sheer cliff face, but the panic hammering in your temples at 8,000 meters? How do you tame that inner beast that awakens in the thin air? Her search for an answer leads Julie to an entirely different world, a world of silence, discipline, and absolute control. She dives deep into the study of Japanese martial arts at a London dojo, the Budokan. This isn't just a hobby, it becomes second nature to her. The way of the warrior, Budo. Years of relentless training pay off. She earns a black belt in judo, and then another in aikido. The tatami mat becomes as natural to her as the rock face. She learns to use an opponent's strength, to turn their energy into her own advantage. But the main thing she takes from the dojo isn't the techniques, it's the philosophy. She integrates the concept of mushin, or empty mind, into her climbing. It's a state where the mind becomes as smooth as a mountain lake on a windless day. There's no room for fear, doubt, regrets about the past, or anxiety about the future. There is only the present moment and the action that must be taken. In a place where every extra movement, every single panicked thought can cost you everything, this mental silence becomes her ultimate lifeline. She brings another key principle to the rock face, working with her center of gravity, or hara. This is both a physical and a spiritual center, the point from which all strength and balance originate. On a vertical wall with minimal support, the ability to feel and control her hara transforms a precarious position into a stable one. It becomes her secret weapon. Picture this: a base camp somewhere in the Himalayas. The air is thin, the cold bites, and all around are hardened, pragmatic climbers. And there, among them, is Julie, in traditional Japanese hakama pants, slowly and deliberately moving through her kata. To some, it looks strange. But for her, this is just as vital for acclimatization as any physical training. But perhaps the most important skill she hones on the tatami mat is ukemi, the art of falling correctly. In judo, they don't just teach you how to throw, they teach you how to fall, how to tuck and roll, how to distribute the impact, how to get back up uninjured. This seemingly defensive skill, this habit of turning an uncontrolled fall into a controlled maneuver, is about to play a decisive, though still unwritten, role in her destiny. A warrior's philosophy demands to be tested, and the tatami mat, no matter how challenging, is no match for the great mountains. In the late 1970s, Julie's path crosses with a man whose name is already synonymous with mountaineering, Kurt Diemberger, a legend etched in glacier and rock. At that time, he is the only person alive with first ascents of two 8,000ers to his name. His authority is absolute. His experience, an encyclopedia of survival at extreme altitudes. Their meeting gives birth to a unique professional partnership. They decide to do something no one had ever done with such consistency and quality: shoot professional films on the roof of the world. They become the highest altitude film crew in history. But in this duo, the roles are crystal clear. Kurt is the director, the cameraman, the face on the screen. He's the artist painting an epic canvas. Julie, on the other hand, becomes his technical backbone, his sound operator. In the age of bulky analog equipment, this means one thing: hauling tens of kilos of temperamental gear to places where every extra gram feels like a ton of bricks. She's hauling heavy batteries, microphones, and sound equipment into the death zone, an altitude where the thin air begins to slowly shut down the human body. She does this alongside the strongest men on the expedition, never asking for any favors, never showing any weakness. Her stoicism, forged in the past, and her physical prowess, honed on the tatami mat, are what make this work possible for her. But an invisible tension is building within their partnership. Kurt isn't just a partner, he's the dominant figure. His word is law. His decisions aren't up for debate. He's the maestro, conducting his orchestra to the summit, and he tolerates no wrong notes, no hesitation. This creates a tricky hierarchy, where one person's experience and authority dictates the fate of the entire team. In a world where the price of a mistake is absolute, having a voice becomes a resource just as vital as an oxygen tank. And in their partnership, that resource was far from evenly distributed. For now, this imbalance in decision-making is masked by the glow of their success. In 1984, their team heads to the foot of Broad Peak, the world's 12th highest mountain. For Julie, this expedition becomes her moment of truth. Navigating treacherous ice falls, battling the thin air, and her own exhaustion, she reaches the summit. In that moment, she writes her name into the history books, becoming the first British woman to summit an 8,000er. It's a triumph, proof that her path, her philosophy, her incredible resilience has led her to the very roof of the world. The cameras are rolling, Kurt is capturing this historic footage, and their partnership is at the pinnacle of its fame. But the very mountain that granted them this triumph is about to teach them a brutal lesson. The descent is always more treacherous than the climb. Fatigue dulls your awareness, and the euphoria of success makes you drop your guard. On the way down, the thing every mountaineer dreads happens. They fall. One wrong step, a single moment of lost balance, and suddenly they are plummeting down the icy slope. Their fall triggers a small avalanche. A wall of snow sweeps them up like rag dolls, dragging them further, churning them over in its relentless torrent. It seems like this is it. For anyone watching, there's no doubt. It's impossible to survive something like that. But then, a miracle happens. Their fall is stopped, the snow grinds to a halt. Battered, in shock, but alive. They pull themselves out from under the snow, check each other over. No major injuries. It seems like a phenomenal, almost impossible stroke of luck, as if the mountain itself decided to play a game with them, only to let them go at the very last moment. For them, this incident isn't a wake-up call. On the contrary, it's proof of just how exceptional they are. It proves they can operate right on the edge of what's possible, push the limits of risk, and still come out on top. This experience doesn't force them to rethink their approach. It doesn't plant any seeds of doubt about Kurt's absolute authority. Instead, it strengthens their belief in their own invincibility. They survived a situation that should have been fatal. For them, it's a sign that their team can do anything. This dangerous confidence becomes their new companion in the mountains. A taste of invincibility. It demands ever higher stakes. And after the triumph on Broad Peak, there's only one summit high enough to satisfy that thirst. In 1985, Julie joins an expedition to Everest, but they don't choose the well-trodden path. Instead, they set their sights on one of the most difficult and coveted prizes in all of mountaineering, the Northeast Ridge. It's a legendary route, a wall of a climb that weeds out the best of the best. But Everest is not Broad Peak. The mountain meets them not just with cold, but with a furious, seemingly intelligent resistance. Hurricane-force winds, roaring like a jet engine, pin them to the mountainside. The temperature plummets to unthinkable lows, so cold that the metal of their ice axes burns right through their gloves. Every step upward is a battle. The expedition gets trapped in the grip of the weather. Days of waiting in a tent stretch into weeks, eating away at their precious reserves of strength, food, and morale. In the end, they're forced to make the hardest decision a climber can make. They turn back, the summit just out of reach. For most, it would have been a sensible retreat, a sign of sound judgment. But for Julie, with a spirit forged in overcoming the impossible, this feels like a deep, personal defeat. A nagging sense of unfinished business takes root in her soul, a soul that craves closure. It's no longer just a desire. It's a psychological hunger for the summit, a hunger that this brutal experience has only sharpened, not satisfied. Everest left a void that needed to be filled. This need to finally achieve that great success, to wipe away the bitter taste of retreat, becomes an obsession. This setback doesn't teach her caution. On the contrary, it doubles her resolve. This unquenched hunger changes everything. It warps perspective, knocking the internal compass that gauges risk off its axis. The desire for a rematch, the need to prove they are still invincible, becomes the driving force. And this new, dangerous resolve will be with them the following season, at the foot of the most brutal mountain on Earth. What happens when the most dangerous mountain in the world becomes as crowded as a city street at rush hour? That unquenched hunger from Everest leads Julie and Kurt to a place just like that. In the summer of 1986, they arrive at the base camp of K2, the planet's second highest peak, but number one in difficult and deadly reputation. They're here with an Italian expedition, but they are far from alone. The mountain is dangerously overcrowded. 11 different teams from all over the world are camped at its base at the same time. The air buzzes with a mix of languages and ambition. Base camp has turned into a feverish, competitive beehive, with everyone hoping to catch the short window of good weather. And the mountain doesn't waste any time showing its true character. The season has barely even started, and K2 is already claiming its first toll. An avalanche sweeps a tent clean off the mountainside, with 2 American climbers inside. The news rips through camp, freezing conversations for a moment, but it doesn't halt the preparations. Then, another piece of news breaks. The famous French couple, Liliane and Maurice Barrard. They've just vanished. They went for the summit push and never returned, swallowed by the clouds. Then, another tragedy. The veteran Polish climber, Jerzy Piotrowski, plummets to his death on the way down, right after a successful summit. Loss after loss. Base camp is turning into a place where the radio crackles with bad news, more often than it does with the weather report. But something strange and chilling starts to happen. Death becomes a statistic. It's no longer a stop sign, no longer that red flag that tells everyone to turn back. The constant presence of tragedy starts to warp reality. A dangerous normalization of risk sets in. Grief just becomes background noise, a regular feature of the landscape, like the howling wind. Every time a team hears about another's misfortune, they only become more convinced of their own exceptionalism. They made a mistake. We're smarter. It won't happen to us. It's a collective delusion, fueled by altitude and ambition, and it's poisoning the air up there. Instead of a warning, these other tragedies become just a backdrop, something that will make their own success shine that much brighter. In this atmosphere, where common sense has given way to a frantic race for the top, the time to act has come. The forecast shows a short weather window, maybe the only one they'll get all season. The team, which includes Julie and Kurt, along with some Austrian climbers, begins their final summit push. Their plan, like everyone else's up here, relies on a chain of high-altitude camps that have been set up in advance. They're little islands of safety, places to rest and resupply. But at this altitude, even the smallest logistical error can be fatal. The Austrian part of the team has a plan that hinges on one key arrangement, using a tent left behind at Camp 4 by a Korean expedition. This is the final high camp, at 8,000 meters, the launching pad for the final push to the summit. And it's right here, in the death zone, where spending a night in relative comfort to regain your strength is absolutely critical. But when the exhausted climbers finally make it to Camp 4, they're in for a shock. The Korean tent is occupied. Someone else got there first. Up here, agreements are fragile things. Now, 7 people, Julie and Kurt among them, are trapped. All they have are 2 or 3 of their own small summit tents, each designed for 2 people, max. At 8,000 meters in a frozen hellscape, they're forced to cram themselves together like sardines in a can. Sleep, or any real rest, is completely out of the question. They're sitting and lying on top of one another, with no room to stretch their legs, or even shift positions. Their bodies, desperate to recover, are instead just burning through their final reserves of energy. But that's only half the battle. The real problem is water. At this altitude, dehydration sets in incredibly fast, and its effects are catastrophic. To get any water, you have to constantly melt snow on a small gas stove. And that process, which is slow at the best of times, becomes nearly impossible when you're packed in this tight. Every clumsy move risks knocking over the cookpot or setting the tent ablaze. The result is that the climbers drink next to nothing. They begin their summit push already on the brink of exhaustion and dehydration before they've even taken a single step out of camp. A small logistical error down on the ground becomes a monumental problem at 8,000 meters. August 4th, a sleepless, grueling night in a cramped tent gives way to an icy dawn. Their legs are numb, their throats raw with thirst, and every muscle screams in protest. and in this condition, they set out for the final push to the summit. The air is so thin that every breath feels like it's not enough, and every step requires a superhuman effort. Their pace slows to a crawl, turning into a kind of thick, meditative torture. Time itself seems to move differently up here, thick and slow, like tar. The sun is no friend, warming their frozen limbs. It's a giant clock in the sky, and its hands are ticking relentlessly toward the point of no return. They're moving agonizingly slowly, falling dangerously behind schedule. The first to reach the summit is the British climber Alan Rouse, one of the strongest mountaineers of his generation. Soon, they cross paths with him on his way down. His face is hidden behind an oxygen mask, but his gestures speak of exhaustion and urgency. And he's not the only one. As they continue to climb, they meet other mountaineers who, having reached their goal, are now rushing back down to the safety of camp. Every one of them gives Julie and Kurt the same look, a mixture of respect and deep concern. They see the couple's slow pace. They see the position of the sun, and they all offer the same advice. Turn back. It's too late. It's the voice of reason, the voice of experience born from 1,000 climbs. But they're carrying more than just equipment in their packs. They're carrying a camera. They're carrying the weight of their unfinished mission on Everest. They're carrying the burning desire to prove that their partnership is still the best in the world. To them, a summit without the footage is just a meaningless pile of rocks. It's a failure. Ignoring every warning, they continue their slow climb upward. The decision is made in a fog of hypoxia and ambition, a potent cocktail that silences the instinct for self-preservation. They convince themselves that their experience, their unique bond, will let them do what others won't dare, finish the climb, and make their descent in the twilight. They keep going up, as everyone else is coming down, and then, finally, they're there. The hands on that invisible clock point to around 7 in the evening. The sun is already kissing the horizon, painting the sky in ominous shades of crimson. Julie and Kurt take their final steps and stand on the summit of K2 at 8,611 meters. In that exact moment, Julie Tullis makes history. She becomes the first British woman to summit K2, the Savage Mountain, the most difficult and dangerous 8,000er on Earth. It is the pinnacle of her career, the fulfillment of a lifelong dream. Kurt pulls out the camera, and even in the thin air, on the very edge of their strength, they do what they risked everything for. They get the shot. But the euphoria lasts only for a moment, because 7 p.m. on the summit of K2 isn't a triumph. It's a death sentence. Getting down from this altitude before nightfall? It's simply not possible. Every mountaineer knows the unwritten rule. If you're not on the summit by 2 in the afternoon, you turn back, no matter what. To break that rule is to knowingly walk right into a trap. In the world of high-altitude climbing, it's a recipe for disaster. The second they turn the camera off, reality comes crashing down with its full, icy weight. The feeling of triumph evaporates in an instant, replaced by a primal animal terror. They are alone on the roof of the world, and night is closing in fast, a black dome sealing them in. The temperature is plummeting by the minute. The wind picks up, turning into a vicious, biting predator. The beams of their headlamps snatch only tiny patches of ground from the darkness, hiding the sheer drops that surround them. They have to descend, but now they're basically blind. Every single step is a roll of the dice. The path down, the one they saw so clearly in the daylight, has become a strange and hostile labyrinth of ice and rock. The race against time is over. They lost. Now, a different race begins. A race against certain death. Darkness on K2 is absolute. It devours everything: space, time, energy. The exhaustion from a sleepless night and the brutal ascent is reaching its breaking point. Their oxygen-starved brains are running on fumes, their coordination shot. Right at the start of the descent, on a steep, icy slope, the inevitable happens. Julie's foot slips, a flash of a terrified face in a headlamp beam. A scream swallowed by the wind. She falls, and the rope goes taut, yanking Kurt down with her. In an instant, the two of them become a helpless projectile, hurtling into the bottomless dark. They are falling. Seconds stretch into an eternity. They ricochet off rock outcroppings, get thrown over ridges of ice. It's like falling from a 30-story building, But in that moment, when consciousness is fading and the survival instinct is nothing but pure horror, something else inside Julie takes over. Years on the tatami mats, thousands of practice falls, it's all become pure reflex, muscle memory. Her body, with no conscious command from her brain, does what it's been trained to do. It prepares for impact. It's called ukemi, the art of the safe fall. Instinctively, she tucks her chin to her chest, crosses her arms, and tightens her core. She makes herself into a ball, trying to minimize the damage from each impact. Their fall, a plummet of about 100 meters, stops just as suddenly as it started. In a desperate last-ditch effort, Kurt, with his incredible strength and experience, manages to dig his ice axe into the slope. The jolt is so violent it nearly rips their arms from their sockets, but they stop. They're just hanging there on the rope, in the pitch black, gasping for air. They're alive. On the outside, Julie seems unhurt, but the force of the impacts was immense. That warrior's reflex saved her, but it came at a price. Hidden internal injuries. A concussion, maybe. In her state of shock, pumped full of adrenaline, she can't feel it yet. But inside her body, a destructive process has already begun. They survived the fall, only to find themselves in an even more terrifying trap. They're alive, but now they're prisoners of the mountain. To keep going in the pitch black after a fall like that, and in such a deep state of shock, well, that would be suicide. Climbing down is impossible. Kurt makes the only call he can, a desperate one, but the right one. Stay put and wait for dawn. They're stranded at about 8,400 meters. No tent, no sleeping bags, no food or water. They are about to face what climbers call a cold bivouac, the worst nightmare imaginable. It's a test that pushes them beyond the very limits of what's humanly possible. A night in the death zone isn't just about being cold. It's an all-out assault on the human body. The temperature drops below -30, -40 degrees. With nothing to block its path, the wind rips every last bit of warmth from their bodies. To survive, they have to sit pressed tightly together, trying to conserve any energy they can. Every cell in their bodies screams for oxygen. Blood thickens, the brain swells, and frostbite begins its slow, merciless work. They can't sleep. They fight the pull of oblivion, because to fall asleep here means never waking up again. The hours drag on agonizingly. The only sounds are the howl of the wind and the thud of their own hearts, hammering away, struggling to pump freezing blood through their veins. Surviving that night wasn't just luck. It was a physiological miracle, something that medicine can't really explain. Everything came into play: their exceptional acclimatization, their experience, their sheer will to live, and maybe, just maybe, that stoic core that had been part of Julie from the start. When the first faint rays of sun finally touch the slope, they see before them two half-alive, frost-covered creatures. But they're alive. On the morning of August 5th, mustering the very last of their strength, they haul themselves to their feet and begin the descent once more. They move like automatons, like ghosts, barely aware of reality. But what lies ahead isn't salvation, but a new, even more terrifying ordeal. Moving like automatons, they stumble downwards, driven by a single thought: get to the tent, get to Camp 4. It's not just a destination anymore, it's a mirage, a beacon of salvation. And then, through the haze of exhaustion, they see them, fragile domes, trembling in the wind. They've made it. Staggering, they approach the camp, expecting to find silence and the chance to finally collapse into oblivion. But the camp isn't empty. It's filled with the ghosts of this mountain. Inside are the others who made it down earlier: the Englishman, Alan Rouse, the Polish climber, Dobroslawa Wolf, the Austrians they'd started the summit push with. They're all in varying states of utter exhaustion. Camp 4 has turned into a high-altitude infirmary with no doctors, no medicine, only a shared, all-consuming exhaustion. They cram themselves into the tents, sharing the last of the warmth and space. It seems the worst is over. They survived the fall, they survived the frozen night. All they have to do now is rest, and in the morning, continue the climb down. But the mountain had other plans. Suddenly, the sky collapses. The world beyond the thin canvas of the tent vanishes into a roaring whiteout. A storm of monstrous power crashes down on K2. visibility drops to nothing. The wind is tearing at the nylon walls with a fury, as if trying to rip them right off the mountain and hurl them into the abyss. This isn't just bad weather, it's a wall, a physical, impenetrable wall of wind and snow, sealing them off from the rest of the world. 7 people find themselves trapped at 8,000 meters. Day 1, Day 2. The storm rages on. The roar of the hurricane is their only reality. They lie in their tents, conserving every movement, every last bit of warmth. Their fuel for melting snow and their food is running out fast. Time slows to a crawl, becoming a form of torture. Day 3, Day 4. What little hope they had left begins to fade, replaced by a quiet despair. Day 5. The storm keeps raging, offering no chance to descend. Their fragile tents have become ice-caked tombs, and they are now prisoners of a mountain that seems determined to never let them go. 5 days, trapped in an icy prison. So, what happens to the human body, trapped at 8,000 meters without food, and more importantly, without water? First, the technology fails. The gas canisters, essential for melting snow, run out almost at once. The final hiss of the burner marks the beginning of the end. Now, they have no way to make water. The only option is to eat snow, but that just speeds up hypothermia, robbing the body of its precious heat. Critical dehydration begins to set in. This isn't just thirst, it's systemic collapse. The blood in their veins starts to thicken, turning from a fast-flowing river into a thick, syrupy sludge. The heart has to work 3 times as hard just to pump it through their vessels. With every passing hour, the risk of blood clots, strokes, pulmonary, and cerebral edemas skyrockets. Deprived of water, the body begins to cannibalize itself. The brain, which is 80% water, is the first to suffer. Hallucinations and delirium set in. The line between reality and nightmare begins to blur. In this slow, quiet agony, Julie starts to fade faster than the others. She tells Kurt she can barely see. Things are blurry, losing their shape. Then she talks about a strange feeling in her arms and legs, a loss of coordination. She can't perform the simplest tasks. To an experienced mountaineer like Diemberger, these symptoms are a death knell. These are the classic signs of progressing high-altitude cerebral edema. But there is another, more terrifying possibility. The blows her body took during that 100-meter fall, they didn't just disappear. Hidden internal injuries, made worse by these monstrous conditions, are now starting to surface. Her body, the one thing that had saved her so many times before, is now shutting down. She's slowly sinking into a fog from which there is no coming back. The fog enveloping her mind grows thicker. Reality breaks down into fragments of sound and sensation. The howl of the wind outside, the icy touch of the tent on her cheek, the sound of Kurt's strained breathing next to her. On the night of August 6th, turning into the 7th, a silence falls. Not outside, the hellish storm still rages on, but inside her. The fight her body has been waging for so many days is finally coming to an end. She simply closes her eyes and drifts off to sleep in the tent, right beside her partner. It's not a dramatic exit, it's a quiet fading away, like a candle when the wax runs out. Her body, pushed to its absolute limit by exhaustion, dehydration, and the effects of her injuries, just shuts down. Morning doesn't bring hope, it brings horror. Kurt wakes to a cold that feels even more biting than before. He turns to Julie, and in an instant, he knows. The stillness coming from her isn't the stillness of sleep. Her face is peaceful, but the life is gone. The person he'd conquered the world's highest peaks with, the one he'd shared every triumph and every failure with, the woman who had been lying just inches from him all through that endless night, is dead. In that moment, his entire world shrinks to the size of this tiny snow-swept tent. Grief mixes with a raw, primal fear. The storm is still raging outside, a constant reminder that they are trapped. But now, he's trapped with the body of his friend. At 8,000 meters, the ethics and rituals of the world below mean nothing. There is only one law, the law of survival. He can't bring her down. It's physically impossible. With a weight that's impossible to measure, he makes the only decision he can. The mountain claims its own. Her body has to be left here, in the frozen silence of Camp 4. This quiet, tragic death is the first in a string of losses this doomed group is yet to face. It's only the beginning of the end. On August 10th, the silence is deafening. After 5 days of a relentless roar, the quiet feels unnatural, ominous. The storm has passed. For those still alive in Camp 4, this is their one and only chance. Exhausted, barely able to move, they begin a desperate attempt to descend. But not everyone will be saved. Alan Rouse, one of the world's strongest climbers, is delirious, his body in agony. He's already gone. Leaving him behind is an unthinkable, brutal decision. But that's the cruel code of the high mountains. They have to leave him in his tent. The descent becomes a funeral procession. The mountain takes them, one by one. The Austrians, Alfred Imitzer and Hannes Wieser, simply fade away on the slope. Their bodies, drained of all energy, refuse to go on. They just sit down in the snow and never get up again. Dobrosława Miodowicz-Wolf, completely spent, stops by the fixed ropes to catch her breath. She just leans against them, closes her eyes, and falls into an eternal sleep. Of the 7 people trapped in that icy hell, only 2 make it back to base camp, Kurt Diemberger and Willi Bauer. They don't look like victors. They are ghosts, with hands and faces blackened by frostbite, and a terrifying emptiness in their eyes. Down in the world below, the K2 tragedy ignites a firestorm of controversy. At its center is Kurt Diemberger and his decision to push for the summit so late in the day. Could he have turned Julie around? Could he have saved her by being more cautious? The voices of accusation are loud, but his defenders push back. It's easy to judge from the comfort of an armchair. Up there in the storm, at 8,000 meters, rescuing anyone was physically impossible. The incident at the Korean tent would forever go down in mountaineering history as a fatal breakdown in communication. The first domino to fall that set the entire catastrophe in motion. But Julie's story doesn't end there. Her autobiography, Clouds from Both Sides, was published after her death. It became a classic, her last word. A foundation was established in her honor to support female climbers and athletes with disabilities. The cause she had dedicated herself to at the foot of the cliffs lived on. And then, nearly 20 years later, in 2005, a melting glacier at the base of Broad Peak gave up a small artifact, an audio cassette that Julie had lost back in 1982. On it was her voice, frozen in time, an echo from the past, speaking of her love for the mountains. The story of Julie Tullis is forever cemented as a tragic and profound example of how passion, when it becomes your very reason for living, can override even the most powerful instinct of all, the instinct for self-preservation.